Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of the Mountains We Climb. In each of these episodes, we'll be diving into the mind of someone who has overcome significant challenge and adversity in their life so that we, as the listeners, can see what is really possible and what it really takes. I'm your host, Jordan Kilpatrick Smith, and today we're going to be exploring the journey of Mark Buggy and his journey of healing from PTSD from his time in Afghanistan. Just before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that you can post your comments and questions live throughout all of the episodes in the comment section right below these videos on Facebook and on YouTube. Mark, thanks so much for being here with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Jordan. I appreciate it.
So where does your story start?
I'm going to start in 2009. That's the year of the tour. I think, I'm going to bounce around a bit because along with PTSD, I've also had addiction problems, right? I started drinking when I was 15 and that lasted for 23 years until I was almost 38. So that really affected the PTSD, how I was managing things. Okay. So I'll go back to Afghanistan, 2009. It was my first and only tour. You prepare for these things and the preparation was good here, but some things that happen over there you just can't possibly prepare for. There's, obviously the obvious danger of war, but you kind of get used to a lot of, being attacked and all these type of things that you see in the movies. The things that affected me most was mostly seeing, innocent people harmed. And that's what, I had kids at home and seeing children that were suffering. That was really, really difficult for me. So I worked in a job where I would listen to intercepts and gather information and try to build intelligence to capture people. And I got to travel all around many different parts of Afghanistan and drive an armored vehicle and really get to see the place and talk to the people. So I really liked the people there. They're great. They wanted us there. They just wanted a happy, healthy life. They wanted to work. They didn't want war. So I was very happy that I could be a part of helping them there for that.
So you said this was 2009. Did I catch
that
right? Okay. So 2009, you're in Afghanistan. Going back one step, what made you want to join the military? What got you in there?
Yeah, I always kind of wanted to help people. I think, when I was younger, I was bullied a lot and just over the years, just it's always been in my nature. And it took as an adult, I came back to that, I just joined when I saw kind of the state of things happening in the world, and I wanted to go and help. I saw the people there suffering and I wanted to join and help.
Yeah. And so the people in Afghanistan who are suffering, now, this is a genuine question. I don't mean for this to come off as anything other than a genuine question.
Sure.
What was the purpose of the Canadians in there? So you show up as the Canadian Armed Forces. What was your job in Afghanistan?
Well, it was, typically people think Canadians and peacekeeping mission, right? But it was an actual war. And it was just because the country was being so overrun by Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other foreign fighters that, people were being terrorized and harmed constantly, So it was just it needed the world's help. And that's why we stepped in for sure.
Okay, I understand. So you're there, you're helping fight off these terrorist groups, and your job is to collect the intel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, the tour, that you see a lot of things, like there's many dangers throughout the day, but I think, there was 4 specific instances there that really, really, that I had to deal with in my therapy for PTSD. But I'll talk about the one that affected me the most because that was the one I needed to get a handle on to be able to get everything else too. So I worked in this little town called Belende, and it's a FOB. It's called the Forward Operating Base. And so what would happen is the military would go push forward and try to drive the Taliban out of whatever stronghold they were using, right? And a lot of times it was just someone's compound they'd taken over. So we would push them out, and then that would become our temporary, sometimes permanent base. And we would have locals that come and work on the camps with us as well, because there was just a way to make money. There's a lot of poverty there, and it was good to build relations with the community and stuff like that. So these people would come in, like it was very dangerous for them to work for us, because if the Taliban saw them, they would be seriously dealt with. And so they would get up at like 4 a.m. when it was dark, come in so they couldn't be detected, work all day, and wait for dark again to go home. So in this particular place, like at all of them, I always enjoyed talking to the kids there, because I maybe as young as 10 and some teenagers working, and because I have my own kids back home, but this one boy in Belende who we chatted all the time. We didn't understand each other. He spoke Pashto and I spoke English, but we always managed to do some kind of funny body language with each other to try to get us to understand each other. And we laughed a lot. So it was a nice part of the day over there in that type of situation, right? So one day he's following me around and I need to go to work. And again, we don't understand each other. He seems a little more persistent this day. I'm having trouble, saying goodbye to him. And I look around and I see this big container of things that we have there to give to the locals. So, and inside it is a soccer ball. I grabbed the soccer ball and gave it to him. This kid's, I say probably around 12 years old. He was very, very happy, right? Speechless, just looked at it. And because they don't have toys over there. Like I saw kids playing with each other, like throwing rocks at each other, they don't have toys. So the soccer ball was just huge for him. And he took off and I went to work, and my day ran on as normal. And the next day I was working and we heard a blast nearby, a big blast. It's very common. There was a very frequent blast around. We were always hearing some kind of ammunition going off, but this one was really close. And when it's that close, like I said, I had access to hearing different people speak, with all that we were trying to gather intelligence. So we would listen in and try to find out who was hit. Was it, Canadian? Was it one of our allies? And it came in, the news came in shortly after that it was a couple locals, 2 kids. And my heart just sunk right there because it's kids. And then about a minute or so later, more information comes in that they were playing soccer. And I knew instantly that it was the boy that I'd given the ball to. And the first thought in my head then was, if I didn't give him the ball, he would still be alive, right? And logically, I knew that this is, I didn't put the landmine there. There's hundreds of thousands of landmines there. They were playing soccer ball and they stepped on a landmine. Yeah. And so I didn't put the landmine there, but the Russian war was there. There was hundreds of thousands left over from that, and Taliban were planting bombs. But for some reason, I started to blame myself, saying that he would be alive if I didn't give him the ball. Now, life goes on in a war. Like I thought about him all the time. I was very sad, but it was really fast paced there, and you have to keep moving in order to stay safe, right? So I finished my tour and I go home. And when I got home, I had about 2 months off because it was right near Christmas. I got home in November and I had 3 weeks of post-deployment leave and then my Christmas holidays on top of that. So I just had all this time off and I started drinking very, very heavy. Yeah. At first it was kind of a celebratory thing to be home, but I didn't realize until looking back that, I was really trying to get those thoughts out of my head.
Were you able to drink in Afghanistan?
There was one Saturday a month. Depending where you were, you could get 2 beers if you were in one of the bigger bases, right? So right. I was out a lot, so I only got to partake in that once. But
and was that challenging for you, since you said you had been drinking since you were 15?
That's probably one of the only places where it wasn't as difficult to be without alcohol, because it was just my mind was so occupied with what I was doing in that moment, but like any downtime, I thought about in my downtime was seeing my family and drinking when I got home. So, yeah. But in the job itself, it was, I was able to let that go and just focus on the job.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so when you came, how long were you in Afghanistan for?
About 8 months.
Okay, so 8 months there.
Hmm.
When you came home, what was it like for you to come back into Canada, which is an incredibly safe and peaceful country?
Yeah.
Like those are very different places to be, right?
Yeah.
So what was that like for you?
It was rough. Like it's a huge transition because you go on from being high alert there to like a safe place, like you said, and a sound can trigger you, a smell can trigger you, and this started happening shortly after I was home. Like Remembrance Day, I went to a parade, and there was a cannon shooting off, and that took me right back. Or my neighbor across the street, his bike tire popped. It sounded like gunfire. The smell of a sewer could bring me, there was many things that would bring me right back. And that's when I started getting flashbacks and everything too, right? So like this life started getting really rough. Like I was drinking too much. My marriage broke down because of my behaviors and drinking. And then the drinking got out of control, and I was thinking more and more about this boy, right? And I came to a point one day at work, and where I just broke down in my troop room, and my bosses were great. They were very supportive. They knew I needed some help, so I went down to the hospital and talked to the addictions counselor there, and they had an idea that I probably had a drinking problem, but I wasn't being honest with them before, so they couldn't help me. But now I came in and said, I need to do whatever you tell me to do. I'm going to do it,
And when you have a drinking problem,
mm-hmm.
how do you identify that? Because what I'm hearing is that there was a period of time where you didn't recognize that there was a drinking problem.
Well, no, I don't know. Like I think I've actually known from the very first drink I've ever had that I had a drinking problem. Like
Really?
It went back. I still remember it clearly. The very first night I took a drink, I felt incredible guilt right away because I had promised my mother that I would never drink. And then after that first drink when I was 15, I felt guilt, and then I just drank as fast as I could to try to get rid of it. So I've always known all along that there was something there.
Right.
And, yeah. So I went to treatment, which was great. It was about 8 weeks in Vancouver Island. And I was able to work on that and become healthy, learn how to, I went in there not even knowing what my feelings were. I remember like I walked in, and during one of the first meetings, they said, how do you feel? And I said, bad. And they said, bad's not a feeling, And so I learned all about shame and guilt and all of these things that I was feeling and that were kind of destroying my life. And it made a huge difference. I came home and life was going great for about 7-8 months.
Sorry, Mark, how long were you in that rehab for?
Almost 8 weeks.
Okay. And so it was like you were out there for 8 weeks, day in and day out, you're in this rehab facility?
Yeah.
Are you okay if we dive into that a little bit?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like for you to finally admit that, okay, I have a problem and I need help to fix this?
It's very humbling, but I've learned how great a strength humility is, but because up until, and we talked about it in recovery, it's very common for addicts. Like you try everything your own way your whole life, and it's not going well. You end up in a treatment center, and you realize, whoa, my way doesn't work. I need to listen to other people.
Right.
And I realized that a lot of the things I thought and things that I did were a lot of my own behaviors that were causing the problem, and I couldn't blame others anymore. Right.
Yeah. Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Taking responsibility
for
exactly what happens in our lives. Right.
Right. Yeah.
What was the root cause of the drinking? Like, what was the purpose? What was the drinking trying to solve for you?
I think the root cause for most people is some sort of trauma. I think it's difficulties that things that haven't been processed properly, things that haven't been dealt with, things that are underlying and need to be dealt with. I had a lot of self-pity and shame and guilt in my life, and these in anger, and these things were constantly were constantly bugging me. And one other thing I learned too is when you start drinking heavy, you kind of stop maturing emotionally too, right? So anytime I was mad or sad or happy, I would drink, and I wouldn't deal with what was going on. So I think that's what, in my later life, that is what really made it a serious problem, because when you become an adult, you can't just avoid everything. You have to deal with it and face it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there were these, correct me if this is not the way that you would word it, but there was any sort of emotional volatility, right? Emotions would go somewhere, some direction.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well,
yeah,
I'm not dealing with this right now, so here's some alcohol. Is that right?
absolutely. And as many and as fast as I could to try to forget.
Yeah. And then so in rehab, it was one of the things that they focused on was understanding the emotions and the feelings, and just, it's a huge part of the human experience. And so few of us understand it. So is that right? They took time and taught you about that?
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. And it's life skills that we need, it's just that I hadn't learned those. And so I was just kind of spiraling downwards because I just kept avoiding everything. And then once I learned how to be self-aware and find out what was going on, I could step back and say, hey, how do I change this, or this, and work on it instead of running from it.
So what I'm hearing is the first step was self-awareness around it.
Exactly. Yeah. You acknowledging that there's something going on. And I mean, self-awareness would be first, because I have to be aware of it before I can acknowledge it. Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what became, and I imagine this is where the story is going next, but what became possible for you when that started to happen?
There's a lot of hope. It's something that I hadn't felt in a long time, but there's also a lot of fear too, because I know about the journey I'm about to undertake. I know it's not going to be an overnight fix. Like they often said things like, you drank 23 years. It's not going to take, you're not going to fix it overnight. It's going to take years to feel, you're going to have glimpses of feeling better and glimpses of peace and serenity, but your life is not always going to be perfect. You just kind of learn how to manage what you have and who you are.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's hopeful, but at the same time intimidating. Yeah.
And just before we continue on with the story, you had mentioned that there were a few things from Afghanistan that really stuck with you, right?
Yeah.
Are you okay sharing the other ones as well?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep. There was one of the very first road move on our way out. We had a big convoy, and we had helicopter escorts, and the helicopters would fly back and forth to look for anything suspicious on the roads. So they found something in an underpass. It looked like fuel containers, which was usually commonly used to make bombs. So we stopped. We got out of our vehicles, and we would do something called 5s and 20s, where we'd search the vehicle 5 meters around to make sure there's no disturbances and we're safe. And once that was cleared, we go 20 meters around just to keep everything safe and make sure we're not in the middle of a trap somewhere. And when I went into my 20s, I ventured off the road, and my crew commander just said he just came on, and like I could hear the convoy in one ear and crew commander in the other. And my crew commander came on and said, Mark, stop. And I said, what? He said, I think you're in a minefield. And he was looking at his map. I looked up at him, and he's looking at his map. And just as he said that, I noticed there were little piles of rocks in different places strategically placed. And I found out later from the locals there that the locals did that to let people know that there were bombs there so they wouldn't step on it, right? So he called the convoy, and they called off the search, and we went back to the vehicle. But I had to find, he said, do you remember which way you walked in? And I said, no. And so I was looking around, and I obviously avoided the rock structures, but that was my very first road move. I'd only been there a couple of days. I was still jet lagged. I was
really just throws you right in, eh?
Yeah, like it was exactly like it just really set the tone for me to realize I have to be very careful here if I want to go home alive.
Yeah. Now in the landmines, or in the minefields rather, Are there indications that, hey, there's a landmine here, or is it often just totally flat and just, yeah.
Like it's you can, the ones that have been there for a long time are really, you can't detect them because the ground has settled over top of them and stuff. But if it's something that had, like, I'm talking the ones that were planted in the war with Russia, like you wouldn't be able to detect those unless someone knew and put rocks there. But if there was, the ones that the Taliban were planting, you could be trained to look for disturbances. And we took a course. We weren't as skilled as the engineers that looked for the bombs, but you could see slight disturbances in dirt and stuff like that. Or a lot of times they were pretty clever with it. They would try to hide it, and you could find it, but if you got lazy in the slightest, you could easily overlook it.
Okay. So we have the story with the soccer ball and the boy. Minefield.
And another one, this happened just really maybe a day or two after. I was still, we just got to our first location, and we were working with the American Army, and I was on a team of 4 people, four soldiers and a translator. So there was 5 of us, and we were working in this small part of the compound with the Americans, and our generator on our vehicle broke, and we had to order it. Our vehicle was mission essential equipment. So they were flying in a generator to us right away. And we don't know when it's going to come in because it's so busy there. There's so much air traffic. We need to be ready at the helipad when it comes. So because they can only stay for 2 minutes. They come in, the transport helicopters come in and drop, and they have 2 fighter helicopters going around with them to protect them. And they don't want to stay on the ground too long because they're a target, big target, to be shot at. So I'm waiting for this to come in, and about 6 a.m, I hear a helicopter coming to the helipad, and I wake up and I'm running towards the helipad, and I'm just going straight as fast as I can, cutting across the helipad, and I see the engineer. He starts waving his hands at me through the air, like really, really drastically. And I didn't know what was going on. I was still jet lagged. I was tired. So I just continued to ignore him, and I'm running right for the helicopter. And the only thing I'm about 10 feet from it at this point. And the only thing that made me stop was he started running around kind of in a semicircle towards me, not straight towards me, but around in a circle. And that kind of caught my interest. Like, why is he doing that? And he came up and grabbed me and threw me on the ground, and he pointed, and I was 10 feet away from running into the rear rotor on the helicopter. It was spinning, so I didn't see it. I'd never approached a helicopter before. I just wasn't, prepared, and it was a new environment. I was nervous, and I found out later that a couple years before, he had seen somebody die that way. So it was really, I saw the look in his face. There was something, like it re-triggered everything, that there was an investigation. We talked about it. And so anyway, I'd wake up sometimes with a dream about to run into the propeller. That happened for quite a while after, so the thing with then the one that bothered me the most was with the boy. The boy, there was a boy, I don't know, you put the documentary up, I'm not sure who watched it or not, but that boy, like, I gave him a soccer ball, like I said earlier, right? And that was definitely the toughest one for me to deal with. And the flashbacks were coming with him, and like, I'll go back to where I was about 6 months, 8 months into sobriety, and the PTSD got bad again. And then I started becoming really concerned with my own kids' safety here. This is one of the things with PTSD, because I was worried about them, and my anxiety was over the top, and my boys were young, and I was afraid they were going to get hurt somehow. It started off with me thinking I was afraid to bring them places because I was afraid to leave them. So in my car, I'd have to look in my rear view mirror to make sure they were there. And then that wasn't enough, and I had to turn around and see them, and then physically touch them. And I remember even my son, who was probably 5 or 6 at the time, looking at me kind of funny, like, what's going on? And it got worse at the house too. If I heard any noise, I had a baseball bat beside my bed. I was checking windows and doors all night. And if I heard a noise, I'd go outside. I thought someone was there. I have to go and check on the boys to see if they were okay. And all while I'm doing this, I'm thinking of the boy in Afghanistan, and I'm scared of something happening to my own children, I'd go up into the room and I would have to visualize they were there. And once again, that wasn't enough. So I'd have to go over and I'd watch their chest rising with their breath, and then that wasn't enough. I had to actually physically touch them and feel with my hand the chest going up and down. And one night when I was doing that, I had this vision this thought came into my head of just, I was watching their ribs rise up and down. And I had this vision of smashing their ribs with my hand, and it horrified me. And I jumped back. And when you're ill, when you're mentally ill, mentally injured, your mind is your worst enemy. It started saying to me, like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're crazy. Why would you do something like that? And I didn't, I just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
I became terrified to even be around them. And they were young and they were affectionate and they tried to hug me, and I couldn't be near them because I couldn't stop thinking about, those thoughts that I had. And it was making me really, really uncomfortable. And it got really bad one day, and I called their mother and asked her to come take them because I was just having a really rough time. And she did. She came and she offered to help. She said, "Are you okay?" But I didn't want to tell anybody what was going on in my mind because I thought I was crazy and I thought I would lose the boys. Right. So she took the boys and left, and I went out to my deck. It was on the second level of the house, and I was just couldn't get these thoughts out of my head. I was really, really struggling, and I started thinking things like, "Oh, the boys would be better off without me, and I'm no good for them, for me. And if I dove off this deck, I could break my neck and die." These were the thoughts going through my head. And at one point, like I didn't even realize it was happening. I was starting to climb the deck, and I had one foot up, and I was in the process of standing up to jump. And I had this really, really important moment of clarity where I realized where I was, and I saw in my head my boys crying, and that at that second I knew I needed to go for help. And I think the only reason I'm here today is because I saw my boys in my head, and recovery taught me to ask for help when I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for those things, I'm positive I wouldn't be here today. Yeah,
it's incredible that you had that vision, that clarity right at the moment you really needed it, right?
Absolutely. And I credit that to the recovery treatment, helping me and and this. I consider it a gift, really. I'm very fortunate that I had it.
Yeah. So PTSD. Am I understanding it right that it's huge amounts of anxiety, paranoia, just like a constant state of heightened fear?
Yeah.
And then constant flashbacks, and the mind is just always racing because you're always in highest alert.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are moments of unbelievable depression too, but for me, it was more on the anxiety side and high alert side. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And then so anytime something happens, because we're in such a heightened fear state, you can't properly just manage what's going on, right? So when your mind's in a really solid spot, if you have a thought that's kind of out there, like you're driving down the road and you're like, well, if I just moved slightly to the side, I would hit these people. I think
right. Yeah,
at some point everyone's had a thought similar to that. But in your case, it was like that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, right?
That's right. You go to catastrophizing 100% right away. And it's funny you mentioned that example. Like when I had my official diagnosis, the psychologist was telling me, I never told anybody about that story about the boys' ribs until I saw the psychologist, and I thought I was prepared for, you're a bad person. You're not responsible for your kids. And she told me that I was injured and these were thoughts, and my thoughts don't determine me. And she gave me the example of a mother with postpartum who, you've heard about, I don't know if you have, I had heard it. She said, have you ever heard about how a mother with postpartum might think of putting their child into the washing machine or something like that? Mm. And that she said, you don't do it, but like, because you're sick, you start thinking you're a horrible person. But if you were healthy, that thought would be like, you'd think about it and move on and go on with your life. But the mind works against you when you're injured and ill, for sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So where did you go from there?
I did, once I was still in that very humbling place where I would do whatever they told me to do. And I had a psychologist that I did cognitive behavioral therapy with. I saw a psychiatrist, and we worked on a lot of mindfulness and with medication. I was doing AA. I was doing spiritual retreats, yoga retreats, many different things, divorce courses, anything that would have been beneficial for me. So the cognitive behavioral therapy was a life changer for me, because you know how we've been talking about these thoughts, how we some just catastrophize and go. What CBT does is it teaches you how to catch yourself in that moment and rethink it, reframe it. So because I start off with 100% whatever guilt or anxiety, and it started off with a piece of paper, and I would write down these things, and within 5 or 7 minutes I could bring my percentage down from 100 to maybe 30. So instead of being in this catastrophe place, I'd be still anxious or whatever, but I'd be able to manage it because some of the anxiety was gone.
Yeah.
So it's really, that psychologist said this is something that they should teach in high school. And I absolutely agree, because you can use it in every part of your life, for sure.
Absolutely. I just want to put a quick note in here for everyone listening. Now is a fantastic time. If you have any questions that you want to ask Mark, all throughout the episodes, feel free to put your comments, put your questions. We'll bring them into the conversation here.
Yeah, sure.
So back to what you said about CBT and teaching these types of emotional and mental, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the controlling of it, the understanding of it.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
The management of it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like things would have gone differently for you if you had been taught this from a young age?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not that old. I'm 46, but even back when I was a teenager, there was much more stigma about counseling and all these type of things, right? So I was embarrassed even the first time I went for counseling, and because of what I had been taught. I mean, not taught, but what I witnessed, and just all the stereotypes. But yeah, I think my life would have been different had I learned how to manage myself and my thoughts better, for sure.
Right. Okay, so fantastic. You went through these courses. CBT was life-saving for you, and you started to get a handle on things again. Yeah,
I did. So life was going pretty well, and I guess so. So my PTSD was the diagnosed in 2012. So they call that a delayed onset, right? They also mentioned that sometimes you can be triggered again, and it can still affect you later on in your life, right? So I started working. I retired from the military, and I was working at a hospital as a personal support worker, and things were great. I loved the job, but I was working a lot of shifts and away from my boys, and I started really getting triggered again by things. I was taking care of it was within a couple months, I was taking care of 3 World War II vets. And we happened to they knew I was military, and we just talked, and, we didn't get much beyond the scope of my job because I'm not supposed to, but there's a connection there. And that got me thinking of war again, and not being around the boys, even though they were well taken care of. Their mother's great. And on my nights, my parents would take care of them. But me not being there started to really ramp up the anxiety again, and my fear for them being safe. And it came to a point where I had to stop working again. And I ended up doing another form of therapy called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and I forget the R. Anyway, EMDR. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, and this I'll put a link up after it explain it. It's a really great form of therapy, and I had to really rework through everything again, and because I had I dealt with Afghanistan with CBT, and I was still using those techniques. My counselor suggested that we go back even further to anything as early as I could in my life that didn't sit well with me. because sometimes these unresolved things will trigger, the things later in our life. So I did this intense work with him, and that was fantastic as well. Like, and just the combination of CBT and EMDR, I'm a big fan of learning and multiple types of healing. And I think they all complement one another. So that was, I knew it's possible that it could come up again, but like, it's been good for a couple of years now, ever since I've done the EMDR. I'm much more better at just kind of accepting, I'm going to have some tough days, and I'm okay with that. Like, a lot of times I can just own it and just let it happen. And cause I know it's going to get better, eventually. That was a big part of the healing as well, because you start to, being a bit of a perfectionist, as most addicts are, you feel like, I should be here by now. This shouldn't be a problem anymore. But
yeah, you
learn to accept that, hey, I've come really far. You know what? And if I'm having a bad day, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. I can just let it happen, and I'll get better. Don't worry. So.
Yeah. The really interesting thing that you just said there was the link between perfectionists and addiction.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
What do you think that's about?
I think it's, for me, it was really insecurity. I think that I wanted to portray to everybody that I was this, when I was younger, this guy who was all together, and I wanted to be a tough guy, and I wanted everything to look perfect. And, as a youngster, I didn't realize that nobody's perfect, and life is not perfect. So when you're really insecure and you think everybody's watching you, you're doing your best to make it look like you're perfect, so no one can laugh at you.
Yeah.
This was the case for me anyway. And so I just, I learned, thankfully, that there's no such thing. And when I was able to let go of perfectionism, and like, that's an AA saying, is progress, not perfection. And when I was able to focus on the progress, I was able to really be a lot kinder to myself, and continue to heal, for sure.
I love that. That's such an important message for, regardless of where people are in their suffering, because depending how philosophical you want to get, the human experience is just different forms of suffering.
Yeah.
But perfectionism is a really common one that I think isn't often really talked about,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I had no idea until I was in recovery that I was a perfectionist, 38 years old. And I was offended when they called me a perfectionist. I had no idea. And then when I looked at myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am. And I'm very arrogant, and I'm very insecure. And and it was just eye-opening to see that I was living this life. I didn't even know who I was,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that like for you to see this whole side of yourself that was there, but you just weren't privy to?
I love humility. That's the biggest thing. It's been the biggest gift in my life, and it's been the biggest teacher, because in those moments of realization, when you discover these things, you have flashbacks of people telling you the same thing over the years that you didn't listen to,
Right.
And some of these people planted seeds in my mind, and that helped me to accept it in that moment. But then there's also people who I blame them for a lot of things. And in these moments, I would remember many people that, oh, they were right, and I was wrong in that situation. So it's, at first it's kind of, you feel sorry for yourself, but now I'm at a point where I can laugh, I can admit I'm wrong, and it's a much better spot to be, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment from Alex. He said this in third person, but I'm going to read it to you.
Yeah.
It says, Mark, you're an inspiration. You've been sharing your story for some time now, and I greatly appreciate your willingness to do so. And
thank you.
Just myself, I'm going to tag on to that. It's such an honor for us to be here and you to share this with us, because I think PTSD is still largely misunderstood by the public. Like, I'm a healthcare professional. I do a lot of mental health work. And PTSD is one of those things that there's just a lot of unknown for me. So, really, really thank you for this.
I'm really happy to do it. And I one thing that I learned in all this recovery process is how much PTSD there is that's undiagnosed. And that you would see this in your profession, right? Like, in AA, I could not believe the amount of women that I met that had been sexually assaulted, and these suffering people would think they don't have PTSD because they're not in the military.
Right.
How could it be PTSD? I've never been to war. I'm like, your trauma is worse than what I experienced. If I can't imagine going through what someone went through, experiencing that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people live with it, just thinking that they have to deal with it on their own. But there's a lot of great resources out there that can help us, or community groups, or people you trust. As long as you talk to somebody, it's so helpful.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who's struggling with their form of suffering?
I'm a big fan of asking for help. Just, it's important to find someone you can trust. I know I talk openly and tell my story to everybody, but that's not for everybody, and I understand that. So I would recommend professionals, some kind of counselor, your doctor, and to set you in the right direction. But if you have close friends and family that you can talk to as well, you can build a whole bunch of resources. I found it difficult in the beginning. If I had an appointment for 1 hour in a day, let's say with a psychologist, that was great. But then what about the other 23 hours when I'm by myself?
Mm-hmm.
I needed to find, a community. I needed to find people that are healthy that I could be around, because my mind worked against me, and I could change paths very quickly. So I would recommend, please ask for help wherever you think it's best. And I think a doctor would be able to put someone in the best direction for that, or a counselor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in your story that we haven't covered? Did we finish? Did we get up to the point where you are now?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I could talk all day about this, but but I think we've covered a lot of it, and I think we've done well. Today I'm almost 9 years sober. Next month I'll be 9 years sober.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a big milestone for sure. So I don't, it took about 4 years, maybe 5 years, where I still kind of wanted to drink sometimes, but now I'm at the point where instead of, when I'm stressed, instead of thinking I want to drink, to deal with it like I used to, I think, thank God I don't drink now, because I would just make everything worse. And that's just a relief to be tipped. That's huge progress for me, where I can have that thought and realize, whoa, I don't even want to drink, to deal with this. So,
yeah.
And it still makes me quite happy. So I'm doing all right. I'm retired. I do a lot of things to keep myself busy. And like I said, it's okay. It's never going to be perfect. I'm never going to be healed. I'm never fixed. You learn how to manage all these difficulties that we have in our lives. And my life, my difficulties, I've been so fortunate to have so many good people help me. And that's why I talk so openly. I want to pass on what's been given to me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I like to think that, there is no quote fixed, or we're all just works in progress. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Oh, 100%. I don't think the work ever stops. It'll never be done, because there's always something to learn. It's when I become unteachable is when I start to make myself suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what has this challenge of PTSD done for your life? We looked at what it did to your life. What's it done for your life?
In the last couple of years, I've only heard the term post-traumatic growth. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
The idea, as I understand it, is, that your life does go a different direction because of the things that happen, and you're possibly doing things and learning things that you might not have had you not had that incident happen, right? So I never say I'm happy that this thing happened to me, but or I can't imagine someone who's a victim of sexual assault being at that place where, oh, I'm glad that happened, because here I am now, right? But it does definitely set us into a different direction where we can make choices in our lives to make things better. And it's made me more open to community and building relationships. And because I used to isolate a lot, and I tried to do everything on my own, and life wasn't as good as it is today. So I just think that had I not had these experiences, I probably would have maybe just continued on the way I was going with drinking and everything, and just going downhill. But this kind of showed me, the healing showed me that I was a good person, and that people are good, and we're all part of one family. And I want to experience that in a healthy way.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.
And what advice would you give to someone who's struggling right now, or to the Mark who was in the deepest parts of what was going on for him?
I would just, listening is important. Being able to listen to someone that's struggling, and kind of gently guiding them to something. Because I find at that time when I was struggling too, there was like a lot of arrogance and everything, like a lot of defensiveness. But I would just let someone know that I love them, that they're worth it, and that there's help out there. I would also let them know that it's not going to be easy, but it becomes manageable, and life is so much better managed that way. It's those little victories that are the biggest things in your life, for sure. And it's worth it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share, Mark?
I think that's it. Like I'm just really happy to share my story and pass on my mistakes others won't. That's what actually Jim used to say to me. We both know Jim. He would say, I want you to learn my mistakes so you don't have to make them. And then I always remember that, and pass on the wisdom that's been given to me. So I'm happy to do it. And I just want to spend the rest of my time here being a good father, being sober, and sharing my story, and hopefully I can leave something positive behind,
Yeah. For anyone listening, Jim was episode 1 of the Mountains We Climb. So if you want to hear about Jim's story, you can also go and check that out.
Yeah, it's a great story.
So now the question I like to ask you as the listener, what are you going to do with this? Don't just let this information fall to the wayside. What are you going to do with this? How are you going to implement it into your life? Who can you share this with? Who needs to hear this story? Or who could benefit from it? Is it a group? Is it a community? Is it a single friend that's struggling? The more we can share, the more help we can bring. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here with us today, for sharing your story so openly, for giving us your lessons. I really appreciate it. And I know everyone listening does as well.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you inviting me.
As always, I will be here next week with another episode, with another incredible story. And until then, have an awesome week.